Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and today I'm going to be treating you to something a little special. For those who don't know, Final Fantasy XI has been celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. It hurts. It hurts to date myself so much, so much. It released back in Japan in May 2002 on the PlayStation 2, and later that same year in November on PC. So technically another 20th anniversary is coming up next month. What do you know? But as part of that 20th celebration, they've been doing all sorts of stuff on a website they dubbed We Are Vana'diel. It has like history, timelines, but most importantly, tons of interviews with producers, directors from both within Square Enix and without, developers, all sorts of things. There's like 50 or 60 parts of individual interviews posted on the site. Today, we're going to be looking at the one they finished most recently with the game's original director, Yoichi Ishii. Now, I can't be the only one who looks at this man. I look him dead in the eyes, and I can tell, without the interview even telling me, this guy directed Final Fantasy XI. Like, he looks like the kind of guy who would direct 11. Like, he looks like a mob boss. Like, he just strolled into Juneau and he was actually sitting on the throne and it wasn't Camelot. I feel like he would kill me and leave my corpse on the ground without raising me to force me to take the EXP penalty. He just looks like he's not messing around. But this 4-part interview, I decided to wait until it was completely done to post it because the earlier parts are a lot more about his beginnings as somebody invested in video games, like as a child, elementary school, and it eventually leads into how he started at Square, and then of course how he started on his journey with Final Fantasy XI. The most important parts are parts 3 and 4. 4 being probably the most important part, or at least the most entertaining part. However, all of it is, of course, fascinating to read, talking about that original journey that led him down that initial path. So we're going to skim through some of the points that are more personal and less about the actual game, and of course, there'll be links in the description for those who want to read more in depth. Now, before we go any further, we do have this blurb. This is at the start of all 4 interviews, so we're only going to read it once. We Grew Vana'diel is a series of interviews with those who were involved in the development of Final Fantasy XI, as well as guests from other companies. In this installment, we interviewed Yoichi Ishii, the original director of Final Fantasy XI, who breathed life into the fantasy world of Vana'diel. In this first part, Mr. Ishii told us of his experiences before joining Square, now Square Enix. Now, another thing here, to differentiate between the Final Fantasy series and its first title of the same name, in this article we will be referring to the first title in the series as FFI. That actually does get confusing at some parts of the interview because it feels like maybe they didn't intend to do that at some points. And then it has a quick little history and I guess current musings of Yoichi Ishii. He's currently the CEO of Grezzo Company Ltd. In the early days of Square, he planned Final Fantasy I and was in charge of game design until the 3rd game of the series. After that, he worked on the direction of the Mana series and other projects before returning to the Final Fantasy series to work on Final Fantasy XI. In addition to creating the foundation for the world of Vana'diel, he was also the director leading up to the Rise of Xylart expansion. Yeah, not as many people remember Yoichi Ishii. Most people remember the producer, Tanaka. I don't remember his first name. And especially within the 14 community, many people know Tanaka as the person who took over for Final Fantasy 14 and 1.0. He was part of the development of that and was, you know, within a couple of months of Final Fantasy 14 1.0 being out, replaced by Naoki Yoshida. So Ishii-san has kind of been lost to time, but he's back for this to remind you that he was a big mind behind everything when it came to Final Fantasy XI. So, like I said, these early parts are, again, a lot about his early life, a game designer at heart since elementary school. When you say games, is that limited to video games? Yeah, talking about his initial experience with games. You know, it goes all the way back to playing kick the can outdoors, frolicking by the riverbank or at construction sites. I remember construction sites. And gathering at someone's house to play cards or Othello. My original experiences with games were these sorts of activities which were common among children before the NES was released. I also played board games quite frequently. Nowadays in Japan, people often refer to board games as analog games to distinguish them from video games. That's an interesting thing. So to partake in those kind of activities, the environment by itself was a game for me. Yeah, I mean, we had to use our imaginations back then. But yeah, so as you can see, it's all great history, but it doesn't pertain too much to the things that we really want to hear about. Hold on though, I gotta stop. I love that it needs, so whenever they reference very specific things by name, they add these little footnotes, and I like that talks about the Game of Life. He converted the Game of Life into an adventure game by replacing the board text with my own and enhancing the immersion by substituting the game pieces with miniature figures and the little prizes that came with candy. Other times I often merged existing games, such as Game of Billionaire, with my original cards to create a different game. Game of Billionaire was a board game released in Japan. Oh, so that, I didn't even know that. So he was just changing board games. And I'm not going to lie, I think a lot of us did that as kids. I mean, nowadays, none of us know the actual rules to Monopoly. We played house rules, so we always were doing it on some level. You know what I mean? So he's an only child and a latchkey kid. Oh, nice. My house was often where my friends and I hung out. In that sense, it was kind of like an arcade. Whenever it rained, we couldn't play outdoors. Everyone would come on over. So yeah, he was playing his games. Okay, we have Bankers and Monopoly. Had boards that were almost entirely flat. I really liked how the Game of Life had three-dimensional mountains and buildings, almost like a diorama. Bankers, it's a board game similar to Monopoly, released in 1953 by Hanayama. Monopoly is an economics-themed board game that originated in the United States, and everyone cheated. Also was released by Hanayama in Japan in 1965. And Shogi. Now, Shogi is one I actually know. I don't know how to play it very well, but I know what it is at the very least. Traditional Japanese strategy board game, often referred to as Japanese chess. That is why I know what it is. I used to play a little bit of chess, not a whole lot. He also played a game called Corinth, which is a pinball-like table game that was popular in Japan between 1933 and 1955. I mean, 1935. Sorry, it was only for 2 years. Wait, it was only popular for 2 years? I guess back then, you know, they came and they went. They came and they went. So yeah, again, all of this is just talking about his childhood, his elementary school. He used to doodle games. But the point of this entire section is that even early on, when he was infatuated with things like board games, he was still trying to create something. He would just take board games that existed and try to expand his imagination, make up his own rules, make up his own cards, play with his friends. So it was just things that he did. But he also just had a creative itch as a whole. He used to doodle or make games when he was alone. So he had a richer, so he may have had a richer imagination than others. And his teachers found him amusing. They would even put his drawings on display in the principal's office. So he had a very enriching childhood, it sounds like, you know. As an only child, as a latchkey kid, he still made the best of his time. He was the leader of the newspaper committee. He must have been quite the little rascal. It was quite unruly. Again, the more I read about the guy, the more it sounds like somebody who would direct Final Fantasy XI. He was already a boss, a rascal, and making his own versions of games. So it's everything that you could expect. My experiences, oh, I see Akira Toriyama's being mentioned here. With drawing, I also like to draw in elementary school. Wanted to be a manga artist, but I gave up on that dream with Akira Toriyama. I like how Toriyama just, he came into existence, and Ishii said, I give up. I give up. I can't, that's it, I'm done. I can't be better than the guy who does Dr. Slump and Dragon Ball. Oh, man. I just think that's funny that just his existence made him give up. Then it moves on to something that's a little bit more philosophical, a question of what to express with video games. There weren't any game arcades at first, so game machines were often found in places like bowling alleys or rooftops of department stores. Dude, I would love a rooftop arcade. That sounds so much fun. That's where I usually played them. The store that my parents owned had Space Invaders, so I played that quite often. Although it was fun, I wouldn't say I had the desire to create something like it. I was a little intrigued by Pac-Man and Digger, but I didn't have an image of what I was looking for in those games. I think it was when I saw Donkey Kong. Okay, if you were a young kid and you were looking at a video game to inspire you, Donkey Kong is a pretty good one, I think. Even though Donkey Kong is a 2D game, Mario turns his butt towards the player when he's climbing a ladder. That was when I could perceive depth in the game. Just looking at, listen, he must be really disappointed in Mario's butt in the new movie then. I wonder if they asked him a question about that three-dimensional display. It's at the realization that the character's pose can convey space in a game, and that's why I liked Mario's butt. Okay, I guess I should read more of these part 1s and part 2s. His pixel art butt jiggles. How is it that even when it was all the way back in Mario, there was an obsession with jiggle physics? Guys, it's such an old game. Why? How did we get on this topic? See, I read parts 3 and 4 first and skimmed through this, so I missed that before I had decided to make the video. In other words, the game conveyed a sense of three-dimensional space within a flat display. Hey, don't call Mario's butt flat. That's not nice. Call it what it is. I guess three-dimensional space. Games can express virtual worlds. I wanted to make games as well. Donkey Kong had a nice bass sound thump, thump, thump for the barrels, and the character appeared to actually have his feet on the ground. Elements like that helped me feel immersed in the gameplay. Video games seem to have the same techniques and tools that I used in board games and the Corinth game I made when I was younger. Quite a bit different from making a video game version of a board game or Corinth. Wanted players to get the sensation they were actually in the world. Game elements like sound effects and reactions are important. You're damn right. And games that didn't really pay attention to those aspects were lacking in character. It didn't feel like they were a real world. The seems for you, it's important that games are a source of entertainment that provides experiences and sensations. Very much like Final Fantasy XI and its original design aspects. Oh, it still goes for it nowadays, but very different. Very different. So the commuter pass that decided destiny. So I think we know where this one's kind of going. I assume you immediately joined a game development company. No, video games themselves weren't really recognized by society. Oh yeah, even after I joined Square, my relatives would tell me, "I'll introduce you to a proper company." Oh, that's reviving senses of my childhood of just loving video games and being told, "So what are you actually gonna do?" Oh, I'm gonna play video games or make video games when I'm older. Okay, but what's your actual job gonna be? Secret agent. That's what I put in my 3rd grade yearbook. Secret agent. You won't let me put video game designer? Fine. Secret agent. Does that make you feel better? GoldenEye was out. It was a good time. Does that mean you chose a completely different job at first? When I was in uni, I worked as in the evenings as a part-time and private members of a private members club in Ginza. Oh man, that was probably a decent time. It really is a completely different world. Oh yeah, sounds make a game on that. Oh boy, that's sure would have been a time. I see making your way into the Ginza nightlife was an interesting choice. After thinking about where the elites of the business world convene, the conclusions I reached were high-class private clubs in Ginza. I figured that private club staff would probably had one of the strictest customer service jobs. Oh yeah. Making a mistake would mean embarrassing the club, so even part-timers had to be highly professional. Perhaps I was self-aware of my own unruly nature and felt that I'd have to learn from the elite in order to blend in society. Yeah, that's called jumping through. They'll crack your ankles open. You mess up with the wrong person. Interacting with various business leaders proved to be a really good experience, so it didn't cure my unruliness. Our clients were all successful individuals, and actually interacting with them revealed all sorts of people skills ranging from good to bad. Oh yeah. It's a valuable real-world experience to closely observe the language and mannerisms of those in executive positions. I also learned about working smoothly as a team, maintaining awareness of our premises, and anticipating clients' emotions. As a result of improving in those areas, the proprietress and manager considered me reliable, which made me happy. After working there for about a year, they handed me the keys and asked if I could get the store ready on the days I could come in early. Oh, they were just looking for a patsy. They trusted you. They trusted you enough so that they didn't have to do it. You never want to be in that position in the service industry. The one that they call like, "Oh, can you open today?" No, I'm not that reliable. Don't try to do that to me right now. Why'd you end up moving to the game industry? Worked at the club for a little under 2 years. They expected me to eventually manage a branch store. Working at it was starting to take a toll on my body. While the job was great, a way to learn society, it was also physically and mentally taxing, started to consider getting a desk job instead. With video games growing more popular, I wanted to find a company that would let me work on games, even if it was a part-time position, so I applied to Namco and Square. Interesting. So that's where Square comes up. How did interviews with the two companies go? It seemed like both interviews went well, but Namco's development team was about to move to a new office far from where I lived, so I decided that wasn't an option. I ended up choosing Square because I felt a bond with East Ginza, but also because I still had half a month's worth of commute to consider remaining on my transit pass. Yeah, it's probably a pretty good reason. I think you would have taken it. I don't know that the pass was the pass that decided fate. Pretty sure that you would have got the pass updated or something like that. Brought 3 proposals visualizing the overall flow of the games in comic form. Remember, Mr. Sakaguchi liked the characters I drew in my proposals. At the end of the interview, he said, "I'll have a desk ready for you by next Monday." And looking back, that was what got me started in video game development. Pretty solid first one. Again, just fun little tidbits, but I got to talk about Mario's butt for a little bit, so that's always pleasant. Now, moving on to part 2, this talks about his starting time at Square, and talks about working on the first 3 games. So, the possibility of creating that imaginary world. After working on the first 3 titles in the Final Fantasy series, you then shifted your attention to the Saga series and the Mana series. Prior to joining the Final Fantasy XI project, I intended to make a sequel to Legend of Mana. The free scenario system in Romancing Saga was originally my idea, and I put my own spin on it to make Trials of Mana. After that, I felt I was onto something when I created Legend of Mana, which enabled players to create their own world to play with. The game successfully established a new kind of fantasy realm that hadn't existed before and was well received, so I was confident we could make a sequel. That being the case, I was going to work with the Mana team to create either a sequel to Legend of Mana or the latest numbered title in the Mana series. And that's when you were approached by Mr. Sakaguchi. Oh boy, and this is where it all begins, huh? He was fanatical about online games. Yeah, no, we've noticed. Has anyone here looked at his Twitter page since... I guess he isn't really formally retired after Fantasian, but he goes hard. He's done like everything, and he's going through Savage right now, as a matter of fact. I think he said he's going through the Ultimates after that. I wasn't interested in them at all, but since Final Fantasy XI was to be an ambitious undertaking for the Final Fantasy series, Mr. Sakaguchi wanted me and Mr. Tanaka in the lineup. Mr. Tanaka gave his blessing early on, but I kept rejecting his offer. Okay, well, I guess he just didn't want to do it. Yeah, Hironobu Sakaguchi, one of the founders of the Final Fantasy series, and Hiromichi Tanaka. Hiromichi, that was what I couldn't remember earlier. The original producer for Final Fantasy XI. And the name, again, most people know. Was it because you wanted to develop Mana series further? Yes, there's previously a time when I temporarily stepped away from the Mana team. That experience made me painfully aware that stepping away had been the wrong move, so I was keen on sticking with the Mana series from there on out. I didn't want to lose the Mana team by leaving again, so I must have turned down the offer to join Final Fantasy XI at least 3 times. They would not take no for an answer, just kept insisting. As a last resort, he urged our CEO at the time, Tomoyuki Takechi, to help persuade me. So he spoke with me and said, Ishii, would you hear Mr. Sakaguchi out just once? Since I was fond of Mr. Takechi, I just couldn't refuse. He set up a video conference with the Hawaii studio, and I reluctantly spoke with Mr. Sakaguchi, but in the end, discussion didn't lead to a final decision, which means you still refuse to back down. Mr. Sakaguchi insisted, I'll prepare what you need to play EverQuest, so just give it a try. He made him play EverQuest. I mean, that was the big thing. Like, when we go into the early eras of the more... So there's, like, the old school RPG. You know, you have your EverQuest, you have your RuneScape, you have your Ultima. Like, you have, like, a bunch of examples from that time. Then, whereas most people talk about calling games WoW clones nowadays, back then, games were called EverQuest clones. Because EverQuest was considered one of the first, like, major leaps forward when it came to this kind of game. Final Fantasy XI is Final Fantasy EverQuest. That was the goal of it. That was the intention, and that's why he's asking to play it. And then, of course, we saw the other side of the coin in that of World of Warcraft, which was just super modern at the time, EverQuest, and how that would inflict its effect on the MMO genre as a whole going forward. So it's interesting that he did indeed make him play EverQuest as part of trying to convince him that that he should join it. So I had no choice but to play. As I was playing, he suddenly showed up on his character and said, here, you can have these, and handed me all sorts of equipment. I thought to myself, hey, that's surprisingly thoughtful of him. Yeah, that's always good when somebody sees that you're just kind of rocking garbo and they decide to, you know, polish you up a little bit. I later learned these items were easily obtained from mid-game content, but since they were unobtainable in the early game, I was really grateful for them at the same time. Felt a little happy at Mr. Sakaguchi's thoughtfulness in coming all the way to give me equipment. A little surprised that an online RPG had made me feel that way. All in all, you could say I fell for his scheme. Hook, line, and sinker. Man, to see EverQuest. EverQuest is MMORPG released in North America in 1999. Oh boy. Those pre-2000s MMOs, man. Those are something. Mr. Tanaka also mentioned I received equipment from Mr. Sakaguchi, so it must have been his coach. Yeah, if you want someone to just start playing MMOs, just give them free stuff. People love free stuff. I was aware of MMOs, had tried Ultima Online to see what they were like. However, with Ultima's 2D top-down perspective, I didn't really feel like I was there in the world. Okay. EverQuest Overworld, on the other hand, had countless players I didn't know roaming around, allowed me to gaze around at the 3D in-game environments. I was able to convey a space and world, and as I thought about how I could even gaze up at the sky at the game's virtual world, came to a realization I could finally create a world of Final Fantasy I'd always wanted to make. Another thing was how Legend of Mana had a theme of allowing players to find their own ways to play, which I felt could be explored further in Final Fantasy XI. I also felt that Final Fantasy XI would utilize many of the systems and know-how that went into Legend of Mana, such as data linking. In retrospect, perhaps it was inevitable that developing Final Fantasy XI was the next step after Legend of Mana. So it sounds like you felt the potential of MMOs in yourself. I did. I'd wanted to include a day-night cycle since Final Fantasy I and to give a backstory for the moon. I'd also wanted to give players a sense of regional characteristics and monster ecology. I think I had a strong desire to realize the idea of living in a fantasy world. Although I expressed all these elements through game data, many of them had to be given up in previous games due to various restrictions. That's true of a lot of old school games. The reason why a lot of modern games that are kind of inspired by old games or remakes of old games, the reason they do things a lot differently is because they weren't done that way the first time, not because it was the ideal setting, but because the technology wouldn't allow it to go any further. So the idea of re-envisioning things nowadays is just to be more sprawling, more open, more detailed is a big fascination that both developers and, of course, we as players often have. However, I sensed some ideas might be possible in the new realm of MMOs, so from there on out, I played EverQuest while noting what I do differently and what I wished was in the game. I also thought of how the game might be improved by placing objects that would draw players' emotions and interests. So that's an important point. He's playing a game, he's enjoying the game, but when he's thinking about the game he wants to make, he's also thinking about what could improve it. And that's generally what the average consumer does nowadays, but that type of feedback is online a lot more. So it's just a matter of differing opinions. Back then, though, there wasn't a great what means to publicly express this other than being the one who made the game. And that's exactly what he did when he made Final Fantasy XI. So you applied those ideas to 11. In 11, I prepared a lot of data that could generate coincidental occurrences. I know what he's talking about. Thought it'd be interesting to have an Easter egg element that could only be seen when certain data happen to align. Even now, witnessing a rainbow over in Lathine Plateau or the Aurora Borealis on Kufim Island fills me with a surge of excitement that makes me want to tell my friends. Well, I mean, you should be telling your friends given what those things actually mean. Today's MMORPG aims for convenience in every aspect, but the fantasy realm I envisioned may have been more like those in the past, where people thought, that was rough, but it was fun. The harshness of the world was precisely why we sometimes worked with others and shared our joy with those around us. Filled me with joy to have been able to create and witness a world where people can honestly tell each other, congratulations, when someone levels up. Hey, congrats. While I'm fully aware of how that sort of playstyle isn't suitable in the current era, I'm going to say that again, every area I visited in my adventures back then have stayed with me through vivid memories, which is something that's difficult to experience in modern MMOs. I think it's a different kind of memory. I literally, like just before this, my previous video was talking about my 5 favorite mounts in Final Fantasy XIV, and they were all experiential. They weren't because they look cool. They weren't because, you know, they were edgy or cute or anything like that. They were experiential favorites, and that defines a lot. So he's completely on the ball, but I don't think that you have to create those kind of environments to have those kind of experiences, but you are setting yourself up to have more opportunities to have those experiences. And that's definitely what classic Final Fantasy XI was really like. So, fully aware that isn't the sort of place... Okay, I've accepted the role of Final Fantasy XI's director because I long to express the realistic fantasy realm I had imagined. Bit of an oxymoron. The realistic fantasy realm? That's like 2 completely different ideas, but I understand what he means, though. So there are conversations so far I've realized that I wanted to create that playful environment from my grade school days. That kind of activity filled with environments that begins from the question, what should we do after school today, was realized in Final Fantasy XI. We can share your joy with people you've never met before in the real world. I was happy to have established such a place. Something that stands out to me in this Final Fantasy XI setting is how they haven't advanced beyond steam-powered technology. I heard you were the one who decided that. It was probably a good... I mean, that's a pretty classic Final Fantasy experience. You know, a lot of medieval or, I guess, simple technologies or civilizations. But then you always get that one that's, like, hyper-advanced, that, like, pass. And for them, it would end up being the Zylardian, the Kulu, you know, it was, and then just the Enlightened races from before. So, yeah, that's always a thing. Very strict rules for our staff members regarding that. That said, after the world of 11 had been established to some extent, I felt it was acceptable to introduce technological advancements that would follow steam power, as long as there was a good reason. So I told them it was okay to do so after players had an understanding of what the world of Final Fantasy XI is like and what its residents value most. When someone had a grasp of the setting, I'm sure they'd think, hey, we could probably use crystals to make a magical steam engine, or couldn't we make a power generator by combining certain elemental magic when it comes to engines? It's very important what kind of setting they were created in. You can't just take real-world technology and have it exist in fantasy for no reason. That would not be considered world building. My man here has definitely got some opinions about Final Fantasy 15. He's like, hey, you can't just do that. No, that's not what he's referring to. But just when I read it, that's what comes to mind. You know, having a cell phone and a car, and it'd be like, Granted, you know, Final Fantasy before that did those things, but that's just how he viewed things. After all, technological advancements in a fantasy realm wouldn't necessarily mirror that of the real world. No. The size and shape of a chair should reflect the racial or physical appearances of the people who use it. Taking those kind of attributes into account makes the world easier to imagine. It visually corroborates with the lore of certain races residing in the area, and when you have, yeah, it's like going into the dwarf houses in Final Fantasy XIV. Makes the world more immersive. I checked those sort of things in detail, so looking back on it now, it must have been a troublesome director. Yeah, I played this game. I'll give him that. Thanks to the level of commitment, we have truly wonderful details we see in the world of 11. Certainly very particular about them. 11 has many elements that aren't visible on the surface. In other words, they may not be implemented in the game, but still exist in the lore. In any case, a large number of staff members poured a lot of their passion into the world building. Required that much more time and effort to unify our decision and awareness, but I believe all that was reflected in the Vana'diel that exists today. So this one, a little bit, there's a few interesting details about his visions for what Final Fantasy XI would be and what he was thinking going into it. But again, parts 3 and 4 will dive a lot more into his decisions kind of after the early stages. I like this part. Running around as director. Tell us more about how the staff members from various development teams were assembled. The Mana and Chrono Cross teams convened first. So you're saying it's Final Fantasy XI's fault we don't have Chrono Break. There's nothing to do with Chrono Cross being divisive in terms of whether or not people liked it. No, it's Final Fantasy XI's fault. There you go. Then I accompanied Mr. Sakaguchi and Mr. Tanaka to speak with our development team in Osaka about joining the 11 project. It wasn't a lighthearted request, and I really had to be mindful of our approach. So joining us meant they had to move and reconsider their family situations. In the end, 4 development teams came together with fewer members than that. I imagine we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we did in 11. I wonder what the total number of people was, though. I'm sure that information's got to be out there. Maybe in one of the other interviews, even. You were picked to be the director of the project, but did other team members have predetermined roles when they joined? Mr. Tanaka supervised the core systems and user interface, while I primarily oversaw data designs related to world building. Both of us were put in charge of many staff members in our respective teams. We were starting from scratch in every respect, and I imagine our staff were unsure not only about their work, but also in their in-team relationships. As a director, how did you organize such large group staff? So, like, yeah, this is like, yeah, it's just, he's a manager. Like, it's just what you do. When I considered how to coordinate such an enormous team, the first thing that came to mind was laying a foundation for the kind of world I wanted Vana'diel to be. So to convey my ideas, I thought of using a world map as a first step in unifying the team's vision and ideas. I used the map to explain why the various races exist, the reason behind 3 dominant nations, and other lore-related details to convey what kind of world this was going to be. Sounds like a lot like a class on world history. I mean, yeah, you have to do that in MMOs. You always have to create the history to create the present setting, because you can't just have a world that exists as it is because something had to make it that way. And then everything you design, I mean, I just don't think there's any other way. I feel like you could come up with the idea first, like, oh, maybe we want to do a medieval setting, or maybe we want to do like a futuristic setting. Like, you could probably come up with that first. But if you don't think about why that world is in the way that it is, then why would anyone care? Like, nobody who plays is going to care. Heck, even if you do it, there's a chance people who play don't care. But you're definitely fighting an uphill battle if you don't at least do this kind of class and world history kind of brainstorming and presentation before even getting to develop the individual parts. The unannounced release date of the PS2 hard disk was a major concern. Our project wasn't feasible without the hard disk. Remember there being considerable anxiety among our staff members as whether the game could really be completed. Oh, it was. Since the hard disk was being released in an unorthodox way, and there were other new network and operations related matters going on at the same time, imagine even the developers were struggling to get a full grasp. Yeah, so the hard disk, by the way, they're talking about the fat PS2s. You used to be able to take the back out of them. I mean, used to, when they existed, you know, so you could still do it now, technically, if you have it. You could pull the backs out of them and insert a hard drive. And then you could use that to store Final Fantasy XI and to connect the PlayStation 2 to the internet via Ethernet or even dial-up. I played Final Fantasy XI on dial-up for more years than I played it on a good connection. So let me tell you, it worked, and it was very, very important. That's part of the reason why the game couldn't continue to be updated on the PS2 also. The hard drive wasn't big enough. That was unfortunate. That said, all we could do is create what would be necessary, and as such, I focused my work with Mr. Kato and Mr. Iwao to finalize the events and world building at a breakneck pace. So, Masato Kato, game planner who was in charge of 11's plot up to Rise of Xylar. Okay. Kenichi Iwao, former planner involved in the lore and other aspects. So yeah, it's just focused on the world building before anything else. Heard you also came up with the ideas for the battle system in the meantime. For the battle system, I wanted to include something that would emphasize the sense of unity between party members and provide a real-time experience. Yeah, I was going to say, I could already see the word before I got there. Skill chains. Yeah, it was skill chains, without a shadow of a doubt. Which party members could coordinate and link their attacks together. Ah, so that's how they came to be. I first invited Takai out to lunch and told him, I have this idea and you're going to help. Explain the concept of skill change. From Takai's perspective, it was a pretty reckless request. Nevertheless, his reaction to the proposal was very positive. He was eager to work on it. It did mean more work for him, however. As for myself, I hurriedly worked on the lore and placement of monsters in each area, as well as the design documents for the required game data. So he was the former battle effects designer. So he had to make all of the effects for the skill chaining. So for anyone who doesn't understand, because it's not being explained here, skill chaining was the idea that all of your weapon skills had elemental properties. And when certain elemental properties were combined by using multiple skill chains, it would create a resulting effect called a skill chain. These could do all sorts of amounts of bonus damage. They could have bonus effects as part of them. And the idea was to try to time all of your weapon skills to use them in a sequential order to create a skill chain. On top of that, they would open up weaknesses. They would make enemies susceptible to a magic burst. So you would also want a mage abusing these systems to try and produce the most damage possible. It was a system that required a lot of coordination. I mean, pretty much all groups, you had to have a macro that said how much technique points you had, and you had to know how long to wait between each of them, and the caster had to know when to start their spell, and it was a whole huge thing. It worked really well for the early days of Final Fantasy XI, but since then, obviously as the game has updated, it's gotten faster. They've added more gear. There's so much haste. The rate at which you attack is something that's achievable alone very, very frequently now once you have the right amount of gear and the right amount of buffs. But the idea is still very strong and still very core to Final Fantasy XI's identity. So his idea way back when, while it's in a very, very different state in the game now, is still something that kind of holds true. I'm indifferent about the system. I think that it works fine within Final Fantasy XI's parameters, but unlike others, I'm not someone who's like, we need these in Final Fantasy XIV. Two very different games, and I'm not down to have this kind of system in a modern, fast-paced game. If you want to make something that's a little bit slower and include a system like it there, I think that's really the setting where it showcases a usability and a strength. So that's a discussion we get to have fairly often over on stream whenever we play Final Fantasy XI. I can sense the hectic atmosphere of those days just from listening to your stories. We were already short on time. My proposal to add such a big feature was met with massive resistance. I adamantly insisted. You know, it's crazy to think that even 11 had like massive time constraints. Like, I guess it's not crazy to think about, but it's not something you think when you think of 11 because it looks like a product of its time. It doesn't look rushed when you had played it back in 2003, 2004 when it released in North America, or if you were playing it before in Japan. It just seemed like a product of the time, but, you know, they struggled with the amount of time that they had and what they actually had to release. And they'll get into that a little bit later as well. We often hear that the development period for Final Fantasy XI was unusually brief for a game of its... Brief is not a term you like hearing when it comes to the development of a game. Yeah, you know, when we were developing this, it was quite brief. Ugh, that's never a good thing. We quickly decided what kind of game we were making, flew through the creation process in a short amount of time. Because of that, I felt burnt out after the mastering process. Although the launch meant we were garnering attention from players and media, personally, I wanted to withdraw from the public eye. I don't blame him for that. Considering the novelty of 11, weren't you bombarded with interviews? Indeed, I received a lot of requests for interviews. There was no time to withdraw. Early on, I tried to answer interview questions in ways that would emphasize the fun of online games. Those looking to play Final Fantasy XI would be met with high hurdles, so conveying its appeal to persuade players to try it was quite the challenge. It's funny, because though that style of game was pretty much what MMOs were back then. You know, they were meant to be games with high hurdles that, you know, tried to encourage you to become a part of the world and become invested with the people in it and around it. So it's funny that he actually does acknowledge that that makes it quite the challenge, even back then, to try to get players to put their time into it before it's even come out. Marketing it, very, very tough. So it's just funny that 20 years ago, that was still a major struggle, despite that being far more of the popular norm back then for the genre. So just a fun little tidbit. So, appeal for MMOs can often be difficult to understand without playing them yourself. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. It's less a question and more of a statement, but yeah. Because of those circumstances, I was very thankful when the media voluntarily did what they could to help us. They played Final Fantasy XI and came up with various mediums to appeal to the public. I feel nothing but gratitude for how they generated excitement for the game alongside us. I can say that with confidence that Final Fantasy XI's increased recognition and massive growth were thanks to the media's support. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank them again for their assistance. And that's back in the day when media was very one note. You know, when it came to video game media, you had, you know, your magazines, you had maybe a few game-related shows, but the big thing was that you had, you didn't have online media. You couldn't just share a YouTube video of an interview. If an interview was posted to the internet back then, it usually had to be passed through, like, just not a direct website if you even had access to the internet at all. So the fact that the media played a huge role in it is actually quite impressive, because just imagine what it would be like nowadays. I mean, nowadays, when you try to talk about Final Fantasy 11, you get bombarded with, oh, the level 75 days were the best, we should go back to that. I've left that kind of thinking in the past, and I just like to leave those memories in the past and think about what the game is today and how it's sought to improve itself going into the modern era. So it's just such a dichotomy to hear about it 20 years ago and compare it to now. Continuous internet connections were beginning to spread at a rapid pace around that time. You're telling me I couldn't convince my family to upgrade our internet for anything. Granted, we didn't have a lot of money, but I was like, you know, it's not that much more money a month, right? I can get a job. And then dial-up ended up working fine. So even though it was great timing for Final Fantasy 11, I still think some people felt that the hurdle was too high. Yeah, even just having an internet connection to play, you need to have the PS2, get this hard drive thing for it, which came with the North American release of Final Fantasy 11, and you needed to have a functioning internet connection. Whew. Scary stuff. Even back then, not to mention, dude, when you're trying to play it at 5 in the morning before you go to school and the dial-up sound kicks up and you're like, please don't wake anyone. Please don't wake anyone. I'll just leave it on overnight. They won't know. And then I won't have to log in again. Even back then, there were always game fans who said, I've played every numbered Final Fantasy game except 11. That happens a lot nowadays too. I imagine the threshold for online games was still quite high. Back when I still felt that online games weren't as popular as they could be, I remember hearing that developers from other companies were playing Final Fantasy 11, which had a strong influence in their own development of offline games. Later, starting with Final Fantasy 12, a new archetype of games was released that conveyed a sense of expansive worlds. Similar to my experiences with Final Fantasy 1, I was truly happy to have created another game that inspired other developers. Yeah, Final Fantasy 12 legit has assets from Final Fantasy 11 in it, which is not that surprising. I mean, obviously going way back to the Pixel days and all that, they reused assets. It was something that was already common within the company. It just made sense if you're going to reuse the same model to actually reuse some. But I mean, I even talk about things like the aggro lines and certain other aspects of it, the zone lines, all that kind of stuff. We know we would go on to see those zone lines in Final Fantasy 14, the ones that were introduced in Final Fantasy 12. So yeah, all that stuff was there. So I totally get what he's saying about that. So, a series of unexpected occurrences. The world you envisioned gradually took shape and was first revealed to the public in the beta test. So that beta test, by the way, there's footage of it still. It's literally like people, like masses of people running around killing a Marlboro in Rollenberry Fields. I think that's the most commonly found online footage of the old beta tests. And it looks so 2002. Maybe 2001 because it was the beta test. But it's still pretty well encapsulated what 11 would come to be. I mean, it was just hundreds of people trying to beat up a Marlboro. And just like you would expect if you played Final Fantasy 11, it barely worked. When you put 100+ people in an area in Final Fantasy 11, shit starts to break. And that's what it looked like, but people still enjoyed it, and I know that's going to be reflected here. The beta test was conducted with only a fraction of what was planned for launch, but seeing how players were enjoying the experience of meeting up and cooperating with strangers in a fantasy realm. Felt the game was going to do well. It was encouraging, as if to reassure us that Square can and should release an MMORPG of their own. At the same time, I couldn't wait for them to see what else we had in store. For many of us, Final Fantasy XI provided our first taste of living in a virtual world. I know that was the case for me. It heavily shaped my childhood. Even if I don't seek to relive those days, I can't ignore that it had a profound impact on my childhood. Games that have become more time efficient and their position in the entertainment industry has changed considerably compared to how they were in the past. When I was working on Final Fantasy XI, I was purely focused on how to convince players to stay and experience the world, but I'm sure my methods would be hard to execute by modern standards. I think it depends on the scale with which you want to achieve that. I think that the biggest thing with the MMO industry now is it looks like it's dying because of the sheer volume of people who are spread out across so many different games. When a lot of people talk about how the MMO genre is in a decline, it's downhill, it's stagnant, it's just because there are so many options nowadays that you can have an MMO that has 40, 50,000 people consistently and still pulling in an income. and being able to function. And then occasionally you have an MMO that maybe sits in like 100, 200,000 range. And then you have one in the 600,000, 700,000 range, one in the millions, 2 millions. Like you can have all of that. So it used to be like that. Oh, you have World of Warcraft with 12 million people. And then you have all these other games that have like a few 100,000 here, a few 100,000 there. I think Final Fantasy 11 at one point. I don't remember what 11 peaked at. I think it peaked at like 800,000. I don't remember. It's been a hot minute, but like it peaked at a pretty good amount during I think it was Treasures of Honor Gone is when it actually peaked. But nowadays that's just like you just have the MMOs spread out. I mean, New World is on an uptick and it's 60,000 people. Like most people look at 60,000 they go, let's look at all these other games with more, why not? But what's important is carving out a niche. So if he wanted to use his methods nowadays to create something, as long as it's created for a deliberate type of player that can fulfill a size that makes it manageable, maintainable, then it could still be done. I mean, even modern Final... Oh, hi, Ivy. Even modern Final Fantasy 11 does fairly well. I think the last census put it at like 70 or 80,000 active subscribers or something like that. So it's doing pretty good. I don't know. That's like 6 months ago. I remember hearing that. But listen, they're still updating it. So it's got to be doing good enough, right? Nowadays we developers are producers of playtime. So games that become more like theme parks, so you can take a stroll and choose what to enjoy. Yeah, accurate. Rather than a matter of which is better or worse, it's just that games have also changed as lifestyles have shifted. Back then, I believe the sense of traveling actual distances was an essential experience where players could savor the scenery and atmosphere during their journeys, and even stop by various destinations to try out the local specialties. I don't know about that last part, dude. When I wanted to go someplace, I went that place. I asked someone for a teleport, and I walked or took a chocobo. I wanted as little trouble as possible. I just needed to make sure I was prepared for it. Traveling around as an expansive world by foot, chocobo ships and airships while gaining different perspectives, meeting new players, and making your way through various trials and occurrences. That's what I thought it meant to travel the world. Very glad to have been able to create 11 in that era when those kind of expressions were still accepted. Again, they're not unaccepted now. They just have to be within the constraints of a game that is built for it. A big thing that it's talked about with Final Fantasy XI, and it's still valuable today, but definitely far less so, is the effect that travel had on the economy. The big thing was that there were items that people were willing to use to make their travel more easy, as well as items they were afraid to lose on their travels. So, you know, you had your invisible powders, you had your sneak oils in order to avoid the aggro of monsters, and you needed to have enough of these to get you through a certain amount, which meant that players would then go earn money by providing those things to other players, and they were always in demand because they were consumable. You can create gameplay loops like that still in the modern day. You just need to do it in such a way that the rest of the world around it is acceptable in the modern era in other ways. It's just about, it's a lot of give and pull. So that's why it's still somewhat important in today's Final Fantasy XI, just not in the same way that it was back then. It's a well-known fact that Rise of Xylar was originally meant to be included at launch, but could you tell us more about what led to it being released separately? Dude, that was a wild time. Seeing what happened like in Japan before we got Rise of Xylar here in the West. So when the game launched in the West, it came with the first expansion, Rise of Xylar, and that was considered the completed base game with the first expansion. Can you imagine doing that now? I mean, there are games that essentially do that now. They turn back around in the first expansion. Not like I know any in particular. But it's a little tougher to do now. But back then, they had kind of a baseline that was good enough. It was time-consuming. It was enveloping for the player. And it took so long to do anything in Final Fantasy XI that they had plenty of time to actually develop. We got to remember, the level cap was even one of those things. Like, Rise of Xylar was supposed to release with that original level cap of 75. But the original level cap ended up releasing with 50. And then they just, like, every few months leading up to Xylar, they added 5 levels here, added 5 levels there, and got up to 75 at a pretty rapid pace before most of their player base was even ready for it. So, very interesting how Xylar not releasing over in Japan kind of made for this rapid update schedule that they would then go on to try and repeat in, like, 2009, 2010-ish. So you all know Rise of Xylar ended up being 11's first expansion, but its story was initially conceived as part of the base story. It's evident if you've played it. However, we couldn't finish developing it in time and had to cut it off at the Shadow Lord. At the time, I felt apologetic towards our players for putting out an incomplete game. Probably a good thing. To feel apologetic, that is. The topic also came up in our interview with Masato Kato, but I felt that there wasn't much of an issue since there was quite a lot to enjoy before the Shadow Lord, not to mention how enjoyable that final battle encounter was. Okay, before I say anything, I'm going to read what he says next. I'm glad you thought so. After the game was launched, we single-mindedly focused on enhancing the game. Since MMORPGs do not end after release, the other staff members and I secretly played the game among regular players, good idea, in order to see the reactions and identify areas that needed improvement. As a result, after launch, we had a heightened awareness to make the game better. So what's not mentioned here is when Shadow Lord initially released and the level cap was only 50, I don't believe anyone ever beat him. I'm pretty sure it was after the level cap was increased, I believe once, up to 55, where he was defeated. And I think that is generally the accepted level, even to this day and age, when thinking back to level 75's era. 55 is like that point where you're at the right point to do Shadow Lord, but you should really get more levels to make it easier, because you're actually at a severe risk of death at level 55. So I think that's why, is because that was the level cap that he was initially beaten at, even if you could do it at 50. Let's see. It must have been tough to make improvements while also adding new elements. That's game design for you. Basically went all out on whatever it was necessary at the time, but we believe paying attention to players' reactions and tweaking the game was sure to make Final Fantasy XI even more enjoyable for everyone. I imagine the work we put into Final Fantasy XI gradually gave us better understanding of players' perspectives, so the first part leading up to the Shadow Lord proved to be quite the learning experience for our developers. I'm sure there were major differences between developing standalone and long-term operation games, not to mention many of the staff members were probably experiencing online game development for the first time. Yeah, they were. We were neck deep in tasks and always in a hurry to finish something, so it was a tough time. I imagine players' reactions when they helped were what helped them to persevere. Even though we were all exhausted from development, some of us went home and played Final Fantasy XI. I'm sure there were things they've noticed from enjoying the game as players. Their awareness began to change as they started to think from the perspective of the players themselves. It was hard to have that kind of awareness with prior games, since it wasn't possible to make adjustments once a game was released. Yeah, it was with 11, and oh boy, have there been adjustments over the years. It was a new experience for players as well, and their enthusiasm was tremendous, especially early on. We were constantly surprised by our players' enthusiasm and how they played the game. For example, content we intended to last half a year only took players a month to complete. Oh no, yeah. So we all know what road this ended up leading down with Final Fantasy XI. They started making content that would take a long time to complete, and that got them in a little bit of trouble in some later expansions. We can say that at the very least. There are numerous instances where the quickest players surpassed our expectations of how soon they'd complete given content. But on the other hand, that didn't necessarily mean implementing an enemy too powerful to defeat was the right thing to do. You didn't think that. Somebody else clearly did. Because after you left, after Rise of Xylart, yeah, no, they did this. And honestly, though, it was because players kept asking for something more. Early on in Final Fantasy, so if you look back to Final Fantasy XIV's early days and you look at how raiders were back then, we were so unoptimal with our tools. A lot of us are just taking experiences from other MMOs, whether it be Final Fantasy XI or World of Warcraft or whatever you played beforehand. And it shaped the way a lot of people perceived was okay or the right way to play 14. And it wasn't for several years where we came down to realize that we needed a different way to play. You know, we didn't need to use macros to chain skills together. It was detrimental in some ways to gameplay, but there were other ways that you could make it useful for announcing things like who you were raising, or maybe chaining just specific actions to specific things in macros. So little things like that kind of came through. Final Fantasy XI in its early days was very much the same, but in both cases, when you hit a point where you do finally understand the game, that is when players' skill starts to exceed what the developers can realistically prepare for, or at least safely prepare for, without kind of going out of their way to do something a little bit more extreme. We've seen this with Final Fantasy XIV raids, how even when they throw us curveballs with stuff like P8S with the accidental challenge, the actual mechanics are not a large portion of the issue. It comes down to the little tiny things that make or break the way that players have to approach playing the game. You know, it makes jobs completely irrelevant. Final Fantasy XI, I don't think ever struck that balance well. They just focused on making things for their game. And if the jobs that they had already designed fit or made sense, then great. If they didn't, so be it. That's why the game allowed you to play all the jobs. That's why meta jobs were often so encumbering over the end game, and then eventually trickled down and became encumbering over the leveling system. Because if you were playing a job that wasn't popular at max level, there was a good chance that while you were leveling, it was also not a popular job for leveling, which could really affect the player experience. But it's just them talking about how they can never foresee what the players did and how they would just do things way quicker. I mean, that's That's MMO players. They're always ahead of what the developers can do. Even when they're behind, they're ahead somehow. It's just how it is. By the way, did you play in the public service? Yeah. I mean, he said that he played it earlier. Spent most of my time looking around. I watched how players devised battle strategies and looked at unpopulated areas while considering what factors may have contributed to their vacancy. I can tell you some of them, but, I'm sure he figured that out. It's difficult to evenly distribute the player population across all areas. Yeah, it's not a reasonable goal. Even if we were to attempt to control the trends to some extent, it didn't guarantee that players would follow our intentions. Yeah, because there's always a best. There's always a best. It doesn't matter if your game has horizontal, vertical, open world. It doesn't matter any design aspect. There will be a best. It will be what the players do. It will be what the players communicate to other players. And you will either have to buckle and go with that trend and accept it, or make adjustments to other things to bring them at least closer to or surpass the thing that was already best. And then, if it's still the best, it's still players' first choice. You've now just given them a backup choice. So, yeah, there's nothing you can do about that. It didn't, and it says even here, it didn't guarantee players would follow our intentions. There was also the fact that each world had their own community hub in slightly different places, so our plans didn't always work as intended. Yeah, just no way you could ever predict that. So they learned that back then, but still. Now you mentioned each world has their own bizarre hub in different parts of Juno. Yeah, that was weird. Nobody ever agreed on that, whether it was just outside in Battaglia Downs or Rollenberry Fields. Sometimes it was all three of them. You just go to all of them and just check everywhere. I'd actually predicted the congestion in Juno. Yeah, I think almost anyone could. Before launch, I was the only one who was worried the story leading up to the Shadow Lord would cause Juno to flood with adventurers. I proposed various workarounds after the game had already launched, but by then we were prioritizing urgent tasks. So very interesting thing. There is a major reason why Juno was flooded with adventurers, and it was 2 or 3 parts. So number one, the story has you go there at around level 20. So it's not that late into the game, but it's after the player has gotten their bearings and they have to go on a long journey to get there. Because they have to go on a long journey to get there, once they are there, they want to stay there. So what do you need to do? You now have that kind of as your central point for the story. That is where you force the players to go. You need to make sure there's adequate activities, unlocks that are there that will entertain them while they're there. But now those same activities are also keeping them there. Juno, also being dead center in the world, made it that if you did have to walk to a location, it was often a great starting point. So completely reasonable that he would have foreseen that. And it's surprising to me that more people in his team hadn't predicted that or hadn't seen it coming, because those are just a couple of things that lead to a central city like that. Nowadays, it's because they put like end game currency or all the new quests unlocked there. It's driven by where the rewards and the new content will be unlocked. Back then, it was just convenience sake because your time was valuable and getting around was very time consuming. So being in this more centered location that had access to airships, a rental chocobo, easier access to the rest of the map, is just, there's no way to get around it. So yeah, that was it's pretty much as he predicted. I proposed various workarounds after the game had already launched, but by then they were prioritizing urgent tasks and developing new content, so it was difficult for the developers to get around to making adjustments. Yeah, I mean, that's just a result. Nowadays, it's so easy to get around that Juno has a lot of people, but quite frankly, a lot of places have a lot of people that AFK in 11. They're definitely more evenly spread out than they used to be. Back then, the journey to Juno was sort of like moving. Yeah, see, there they go. It was like moving from your hometown to the big city, and everybody was trying to get there. More of our auction houses were only available in Rulud Gardens and Lower Juno, and people were particularly crowding Lower Juno. I remember taking almost a minute to change areas. Dial-up player. I know that guy. Also dial-up player. The world map was structured in such a way that people from each of the 3 nations would gather in Juno. So my ideas at that time were to further divide Juno into smaller... Oh, man, that would have been awful. Or to add a mechanism that would change the player hub based on player level. It's only after Juno was overpopulated that I was told it was just as you said. Looking at the root of the problem, I believe it was largely responsible because of the way the world was originally illustrated, and I regret it deeply. Juno became a hub for cross-cultural exchange and had its share of problems due to popularity, but in a way, its situation was typical, was and still is. So yes, less typical now. You can do things like Final Fantasy XIV, great example. Limsalo Minsa, one of the most popular starting cities, one of the most popular cities as a whole. It has some disadvantages to other places, but you know what ended up making it the most popular? Right next to the Aetheryte is the auction house, the market board. That alone drove a lot of people there initially, and look what it's become on most servers. Like it's just sometimes it's just those little tiny things that start the avalanche. And Juno was just everything that starts the avalanche in the same place. And finally, we come to part 4 of the interview. Interestingly enough, in my Discord, this was the only part I recall seeing anybody post. So, you know, that's just the kind of the part that reminded me that it was the final part, because I had already seen that it was coming out before that. Now, this is where he talks about the world of Final Fantasy XI and a harsh world where everyone can be kind. Mr. Ishii, was there anything that you paid specific attention to in designing 11? From the beginning of development, I sought to create a harsh environment where people would instinctively feel compassion for others. How they would perceive death was crucial in achieving that environment, and that's where our EXP penalty came into play. Many MMORPGs at the time featured a hefty EXP penalty on death, and our team was certainly privy to that trend, but for me, the important part was the perception and sensation that came with the penalty. I was convinced that the fear of getting KO'd would further emphasize a sense of thrill and desperation, which in turn would turn dramatic events with allies and the triumph of overcoming hardship into unforgettable memories. You know what's funny? I've died a lot in Final Fantasy XI. I can't really tell you more than 1 or 2 times about the conditions of the death, or if it left the lasting impact on me. So I think even back then, I was never the target audience for the EXP penalty, invoking that kind of feeling. Like, yeah, I remember going down the party list or going down the list of people in the area, seeing, oh, is there a white mage? And then checking the nearby one to see if I could get a raise. But I couldn't tell you about any individual occurrence. I just remember that just being the way of things. So even back then, I don't think I was too keen on it. But even they didn't want it to be as hefty an experience. It just needed to have an impression, which I think is a nice little advancement on taking a penalty and then pushing it forward. You just want those things to feel just the right way. Not too much, not too little, just the right way. And that's what they were going for with that one. Remember how terrified I was of leveling down as I meekly explored dungeons for treasure chests? Yeah, if you were just exploring for treasure chests for no reason, yeah, you should have been afraid, because that's dangerous. Why would you do that? In Final Fantasy XI, I wanted people to play with the mindset of, I never ever want to die, instead of, it's okay if I die. You know what's funny? I never felt that I never ever want to die, because I just looked at it as, oh, I can just kill a few monsters and I'll get it back. Like, at worst, I need to wait a little bit for a party, and if the party has frequent deaths, then, you know, I'll probably leave it. But I always felt like, you know, it's okay if I die, or at the most it got to, oh, dead again. Even as a kid. So it's just interesting to see what they were aiming for, and how I already just didn't mesh with it back then as a 13-year-old trying to play this game. It's a safe environment. In a safe environment, it's easy to feel like other people don't matter, and you don't think twice about inconveniencing somebody else. Let me tell you, I played a lot of 11, and it doesn't matter what kind of environment it is. People just don't think about inconveniencing other people. How many people in old 11 aggroed one monster, said, I can't die, I need to make it to the zone line. And by the time they get to the zone line, they got a billion enemies behind them. And you know what those billion enemies do back then? They turned around and started walking back to where they spawned. And they would kill so many other players in the process. If you make death dangerous, yes, it can be one of those situations where you might want to consider your fellow friend, but it's just as equally on the other side. And that's a common misconception, because like what he describes absolutely happens. Whereas those who've leveled down before can sympathize when someone else is hit with an EXP penalty, and those feelings motivate them to protect their friends and rush to aid anyone who needs help. Some people who've been through rough times are spurred by the experience to help others. I wanted to create an ideal world where people can be kind to others because of their own painful experiences, not one where kindness is the only thing left after eliminating everything negative. In battle, you have to look out for your party members, because if you don't, you wipe out. I wanted players to experience living in a world where people support each other without experiencing something in return, rather than some self-centered notion that everything's fine as long as you're doing well for yourself. The problem, again, is you don't automatically achieve this by doing Final Fantasy XI's design, because people are people. And that means there are 100% people who are selfish and looking out for themselves. And if the stakes are really high, those players sometimes feel almost instinctually like they need to do that. Now, does that come around and bite them in a game like this? It depends. I've seen it go that way. I've seen it go not that way. You know, but it's just, it just depends. It just depends on the scenario. So I think that they kind of achieve this, and a lot of people will have fond memories of that. but a lot of people will also remember the other side of those effects as well. As long as, you know, you choose to remember those things, or you have experienced those things. I'd say the cruelness of the EXP penalty may have inspired players to take a closer look at each other. In MMORPGs, players are represented by virtual avatars, so you can't judge each other based on race, age, gender, social hierarchy, and other outwardly factors. You sure can. Do not go into Final Fantasy XI chat nowadays. And honestly, don't even go back into it back then. Playing as avatars puts everyone face to face with each other's inner qualities, which makes it easier to understand how others feel. And also teaches us more about ourselves through how we interact with others. I had the feeling that it'd be too hard to notice this kind of things if the world were too easygoing. The harshness of the world wasn't designed that way just to be mean. There was a proper reason for it. Death may be lurking around every corner, but you learn to value the relationships with the people you encounter. Also learn more about yourself through heart-to-heart interactions. So to create a fantasy realm where everyone acted out of compassion in their hearts, an element that couldn't be expressed with game data. So when interviews asked me about the theme of Final Fantasy XI, I answered that it was bonds. James Bonds. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing. When a lot of people think of the old school MMO, bonds is definitely the term that I think most aptly describes it. People refer to, you know, always needing to be grouped up with other people and being forced to have interactions with other people, and how it pushed them into an environment that got them to be a little bit more social. I am somebody who is in that field. I was not very social as a kid. I still to this day consider myself very difficult for me to in person have conversations with people. Very intimidated by the physical appearance, just like someone physically being in front of me. I'm like, oh, you're real. But in Final Fantasy XI, you know, I didn't have to worry about that so much, so I was able to socialize a lot more. Whether or not that was a good thing or a bad thing, I think it's a mix. I think that I picked up some basic social habits from that, but I also think I picked up some good ones and some bad ones. So the ones that I've had to definitely overcome as I've gone into my later years. So it's again, it's just nothing exists in a vacuum. None of these elements exist in a vacuum. So everything they want to achieve, they absolutely achieved, but they all came at another price, and a price that, as we got into the later years, as you know, more convenience, and as they say, developing for playtime and not for like long experiences, that it just felt more and more out of favor, I suppose. So I saw something like that in those moments where parties are competing over the same leveling camp, but if one party was close to wiping and called for help, the other group came rushing to their aid. Dude, I think we play different games. I think it's just NA. I think I got the NA range. Dude, if somebody else, if you're competing over the same leveling camp, it was an actual competition in my experience. You didn't save the other party a lot of the times, because one of two things happened when they died. Either they vacated the spot and you got all the mobs, or you had until they returned to pull as many as you could uninterrupted. Now, does that mean these situations didn't happen? Absolutely not. I remember helping people out and occasionally killing call for help, but it had to be at a time that wasn't inconvenient to the party a lot of the times. Like if you had a tank going out and like provoke pulling or something like that, if they provoke pulled and then they saw a call for help, they didn't abandon what they were doing. You were up against a really tough target on your own. So you had to finish killing yours and then still make it over to help them. It wasn't feasible to really do it any other way. Maybe your healer, if they had a lot of MP, they'd go over and maybe try to spot heal the people in the other party to try and keep them alive. And that does kind of fulfill the camaraderie section there, but you still need to watch out for your party first. So I very rarely saw this. Most of the time that I saw a call for help, it was either griefing or a mistake, and very rarely a well enough timed thing that could actually assist. But again, everything is situation to situation. I just didn't see this exact situation described very often. In Final Fantasy XI, everyone can be their true selves in their interactions with others, so the words "thank you" come naturally. Yeah, thank you. No, TH tab auto translate. Thank you. There you go. For instance, when a party accidentally pulled too many monsters, you'd see the paladin put themselves in harm's way to keep everyone else alive. Yeah, most of the time you would just see them like try to run off to the distance or die before bringing it back to the party, and you would just accept that death because you had a raise in the party or you had a raise nearby, and you could. They wouldn't lose much, in other words. So it was just like, whatever, we now have a few minutes of waiting before they're unweakened, and then we can try again. So that's when everyone asked around in their link shells, see if anyone had a high level raise, and someone would respond. Yeah, so like you went through those things pretty quickly, but it also depended on where you were and how far out of the way it was, because sometimes it was unreasonable to expect someone to come out and do a freaking like raise 3 on you. Oh yeah, very, very different times. Let's see. You don't gain. So the philosophy of yours really shines though in 11, doesn't it? Perhaps. You don't gain EXP or powerful items from being nice. See, he acknowledges this. So for those who only cared about optimization, the EXP penalty may have only been a nuisance. Yeah, I mean, at max level, it was more of a nuisance than anything else. People didn't mind throwing their lives away to get to make sure that something worked, because getting the EXP back was just not all that time consuming. So at most, it was an inconvenience. But it did make somebody's life a resource, a cooldown even. When someone helps you in time of great need, their gratitude default remains as a memory for a long time, doesn't it? Those feelings of gratitude would then be transmitted from one player to another, and I wanted to see a world where people cherish that sort of thing. I wanted to create a world where people would want to cherish those kind of things. Then again, the person who lends a hand typically forgets all about what they did. Yeah, no, I couldn't tell you any time I went out and res somebody. I did it, but I couldn't tell you any time about it. I mean, he's still hit the nail on the head, because, I mean, even just thinking about this video, those feelings of gratitude would be transmitted from one player to another. Now that's done via memories, you know, because modern 11 doesn't have as many of these moments. Most of the people who talk about 11 are referring to the old days. So even to this day, those experiences are still transmitted from one player to another. It's just through a completely different medium and not something that is current. It is something that has happened in the past. So it's still absolutely right. When somebody helps you, you're very grateful for it. But again, I don't have any specific memories, so I don't think it meant as much to me. I still did it. I remember one time, so here's a time that I could think of. Remember one time I bought an astral ring. Astral ring, very expensive ring. But one day I just decided to throw like a random like try onto the auction house, because you could put a price and see if you got one for that price, because it was like unseen listing prices for the way the market board worked. And I got it for like 1/10 of its price. Like someone forgot a 0. The person who I bought it from messaged me and said, I didn't mean to sell that. Would you mind giving it back to me? And I'll give you 200,000 gil or whatever. And I paid 70,000 for it. I was getting it back, and they had gone out of their way. They weren't rude about it. They apologized. They said they know it's an inconvenience. And in that moment, I had a choice. Should I give this person their astral ring back and take like the bonus prize they want to give me, regardless of what the reason is, or should I say fuck them and keep it for myself? I remember I gave it back to them, and I didn't take the 200K. I just said, just give me 100, because, you know, whatever. It's a profit all the same. I remember telling my link shells about that, and they all called me a fucking idiot. I had done this very nice thing, and everyone shit on my forehead for even thinking of doing that, because of Astral Ring was like 700,000 at the time, and I got it for 70. And they were like, you fucking idiot. You are the stupidest fucking person I've ever played this game. That was the response I got. So I remember that experience, but I remember the first half being like, oh, I'm doing a good thing. The second half being like, all right, guess I'm a fucking numbskull for doing that. So different strokes. Different strokes. Nowadays, you can easily gain experience even if you're solo, feel much less nervous about the EXP penalty. That's only inevitable, since playstyles and games are always changing with the times. The concept of an EXP penalty may not be suited for the current era, where playstyles are centered around how you enjoyed the limited amount of time you have. Very well put. Was there anything you found impressive in terms of player trends? I was most surprised by how there were more players than I'd expected who leveled their support job to level cap in addition to their main job. Yeah, I mean, you already have it halfway. Back when I played EverQuest, I played as a paladin and one other class, but leveling multiple classes was rough. I see why you were surprised, since if you were doing it for the support job, you really only needed to level it to halfway. Yeah, I mean, it depended on the job. Like, Ninja got really expensive if you tried to keep leveling it, so most people didn't take that to level cap. But something like Warrior or Thief or maybe Red Mage the mages were all pretty expensive to get leveled, but like, yeah, for some people, it was a matter of monetary cost. It was a matter of time. So there was a few different factors that went into it. The support job system was something I suggested early on, and one of its purposes was to give players a reason to level up more than one job and allow them to party with friends who started playing later. Yeah, makes sense. We wanted to avoid a situation where people who wanted to play together on the same world couldn't do so because of a difference in levels. Eventually, we got the level sync feature for that. Support jobs also broaden the range of available tactics with different job combinations, and one of the ideas behind that was to allow parties to compensate for the lack of a certain role. I wouldn't say that sub-jobs achieved that most of the time. Most of the time, if you took a sub-job, it was because it was ideal. Now, what ideal meant changed depending on the circumstance. Give you a great example. I remember leveling my warrior as warrior sub-thief. I wasn't trying to tank, I wasn't trying to fill in for a tank, and warrior, quite frankly, wasn't a great tank after the very early levels. So I had two options. I could go warrior sub ninja, which would give me Utsusemi and make me a little more survivable at the cost of some of my damage. Or I could throw on a great axe, go sub thief, and basically, you know, with any skill chain, kill the mob in a weapon skill, in two weapon skills. And that's the route I went. Now, against some enemies, that was okay because they were generally low threat. You know, if they were attacking someone, they were only a threat to that person and not a massive threat at that. However, there were monsters that, if you weren't sub-ninja, were a continuous threat to the entire party. There were also enemies that, if you did go sub-ninja, they would use skills that would just wipe out your shadows and your whole defenses would crumble. So what was the point in even bringing it in the first place? So there are all these different elements to consider, but you still really only rotated between maybe one or two or, you know, maybe three. I think I have... Do I have... Oh, yeah, I do have it. It's right here. Yeah, here, let's get some sub-job ideas from the Final Fantasy XI strategy guide here. Let's see, what's a good sub-job for warrior, guys? What's a good sub-job for warrior right here? Let's see, what do we got? Table of contents, the races, common tactics, your character, how to gain levels. What do we got here? On the job, standard jobs. Here we go. We got warrior. All right, warrior's on page 40. All right, let's see here. What's a good sub-job? I'm sure the strategy guide has all sorts of great sub-jobs for warrior. Warrior race choices. How long to solo. Yummy targets. Monsters to avoid. Your 2-hour ability. And weapon skills. Does it not? Where's the sub-job recommendations? Come on. Why should I have to die? There's a section in here that says, why should I have to die? Well, okay. Warrior sub-paladin. This is the reversal of the usual combination. Warrior has paladin as a support job will have the ability to survive under grueling circumstances. No, you won't. With wonderful armor, supreme defense, and the hit points in the match, it seems like the combo would be unstoppable. What gets in the way is the duo's limited magic. Yeah, very limited. Warrior sub-monk. Warriors with slower weapons can benefit from the counter ability. Yeah, warrior sub-monk was pretty standard. That was most people's first. Warrior sub-thief. I mentioned that one. This is a combination that is mainly used for farming extra items in gil outside of areas. No, it's meant for killing things with trick attack, or sneak attack and trick attack. Few evil tricks to offer. There you go. And then warrior sub-white mage. Used as an opportunity to make warriors into a soloable job at medium levels, this combination is not for party use. People who want to have an evening to themselves can switch from a mainstay combo to do this while they farm gil or to gather light experience. Warrior sub-white mage gets to start a warrior on healing magic before reaching paladin at the higher levels, thus has a side bonus of preparing people for later. There are some great sub-job recommendations in that book, let me tell you. But yeah, those are just a few. It also led to players experiencing a variety of jobs, and some of us are even inspired to change our main. That was part of my aim. For instance, warrior mains know their job is good at where it falls short, what kind of support it would make that would make them happy. Apparently, some white mage. You can't really understand that sort of thing until you experience it for yourself. Should you choose to level white, you can then understand how a white mage might even feel when you're playing a warrior. No, those don't equate. those two things don't equate. Final Fantasy XI is Mr. Ishii's graduation project. What do you think of Final Fantasy XI's role in the history of video games? Creating an in-game world doesn't mean just preparing pictures of different looking landscapes like a stage set. You have to create an environment where people can perceive a solid purpose. I feel like this attitude has spread and strengthened amongst developers. The monsters in 11 have various sensing abilities, sight, hearing, smell, magic. These are my idea and they developed by the entire team, but I think they help us get a sense of the monster's characteristics and nature. Final Fantasy XI, I not only wanted to represent monsters as living creatures, but I wanted to create room for players to see and imagine monsters. Yeah, sometimes after you've experienced enough of a type of monster, you see a new type and you're like, well, that's got to work that way, right? And when you're right, you know, it's fairly rewarding. So you try to get them to a sense of the living and breathing world. That's right. The in-game weather was controlled by internal data, and even though no one noticed it at first, there was data for different phases of the moon, which affected fishing. As people eventually noticed, hey, are they related somehow? They began to wonder if the moon influenced other aspects of the game as they verified and exchanged circumstantial evidence. Everyone seemed to be enjoying these discussions. This next sentence, we already know that a lot of those things aren't true, like the crafting directions and stuff. So the next question really burns some people. That sort of hidden data is what led to various urban legends and fads based on false rumors, because it was bullshit. Doesn't matter how much circumstantial evidence you had, facing west did not help. It shows that there was room for imagination in Vana'diel. It's my belief that the world wasn't limited to what was prepared by the developers, and that adding the players' imaginations would enhance everyone's perception of Vana'diel as a fantasy realm. How would you describe 11's relative to your entire career? It was my graduation project from Final Fantasy. Perhaps you could say it was the Final Fantasy 1 wanted to create. See, I think here they meant to say Final Fantasy 1 I wanted to create, but because of the I, it's like Final Fantasy I wanted to create. It's kind of weird. The game is a 3D representation of the fantasy realm I envisioned for Final Fantasy 1, and I was filled with a sense of accomplishment to have finally made the Final Fantasy I originally wanted to create. Yeah, it's a pretty good goal. It's a pretty good thing. Not many people get to do that in their lives. So you're able to realize the world of Final Fantasy as you originally envisioned it. There's still a lot more I wanted to do, but I believe the game was a successful expression of what I wanted to convey, as well as what I wanted others to feel and cherish. There's no mistaking it, I was only able to feel that satisfaction thanks to the players who've been playing 11 all these years. On a slightly different topic, could you tell us about your current work and any goals you'd like to achieve in the future? Ever since leaving 11, I've been a bit removed from the front lines to focus more on production and management. I've been creative in creating an awareness of development among the staff. And after becoming independent as Grezzo, my role has been one of a manager. I'd happily work on smaller projects if I had more time, but for now, I think it's important for me to encourage and watch over the staff members at our company. In other words, you're focusing on development human resources as a head of the company. Looking back on my life as a game developer, I've been blessed with extraordinary opportunities and experiences. I've also been helped in many ways as I was creating games. Maybe doing so just happens to be part of the job, but even so, I believe I was able to make use of my abilities thanks to the people who supported me. As I've grown older, I've thought about what I can do to return the favor. The mindset I have now is taking the ultimate responsibility and watching over younger generations as they're given chances of their own. Little by little, perhaps I've started to change from the self-centered developer I used to be. Maybe. He's not 100% certain. Personally, I'd be interested to see you work on another game again. Every once in a while, I get an itch to quietly release something to make people go, look at what Ishii's working on nowadays. I have quite a lot of ideas stocked up. However, the way games are played has turned out differently from my expectations. When I consider whether my work would fit in the current environment, I find myself going, not sure. See, I mean, again, it would, you might not be like a multi-million sales like game, or like you could still make something that you want to make though. Just, you got to work within the realistic boundaries of what it is you are trying to create. It's a matter of whether it would resonate with players in the game market of today. Nowadays, the saturation of games has become part of consumer culture. I feel there's a stronger trend of self-promotion compared to before. Modern games also require massive budgets, and it's very tough to break even. This is true. Square Enix puts out a note about that every like 3 months, it seems, every like quarter. Rather than work on games like that, I'd have a stronger desire to make something as a hobby, like the games I played in elementary school. Nice. In the interview with Mr. Amano, you'd mentioned that your next work might be something other than games. Receive some personal invitations to try something new every now and then. There was one for a game with quite the large budget, and there was one with even some proposals that weren't related to game development. Those kinds of offers can pique my interest too, so I don't want to limit myself to games. If I were offered a feasible project with a good timing, I probably want to do it while I still have the energy. Finally, do you have any words for Final Fantasy XI and its players as they celebrate the 20th anniversary? I believe that while games are made by developers, the true worth of a game is decided by its players. I'm truly happy and grateful for how 11 has continued to receive attention 20 years after its release. It'd be an honor if 11 could be like that someone you reflect back on and we're glad to have met. Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what 11 is to me now. I don't in any way miss classic 11. I wouldn't want to go back to it. I just remember, like, in retrospect, how it was for parts of my life outside of Final Fantasy XI. But I also recognize that I probably wouldn't be on the path that I'm on today if not for that experience. So it 100% shaped what I am and who I am, even if it doesn't have to be who I am forever. So 100% agree with that statement right there. You reflect back on it. You're glad you met them. but you don't need to spend every waking moment with them at the same time. Final Fantasy XI development team is continuing to work hard. It's also thanks to all the players that their operations have been able to continue. I'd be glad if you could perhaps revisit the characters you experienced those personal bonds with and take a trip down memory lane through your precious memories of Vana'diel. And with that, that is finally a wrap to this interview. This video ended up going on really long, but I mean, it's very insightful. All of these interviews are incredibly insightful into what went into Final Fantasy XI. And I don't produce 11 content on the channel all too often because I just get the same shit in my comment section every time. Like, they ruined the game when they raised the level cap, and this was the best game ever made. And like this sort of like, there's more sort of like hardcore elitist sentimentality of what 11 used to be and how the current game industry is like in an unacceptable, I don't know, you know the drill. I'm so fucking sick and tired of it, but it is what it is. And so I don't like to make 11 content all too often. I'd prefer to, again, leave it as a memory and acknowledge and cherish that memory without being kind of stuck in it. But that doesn't make any of the things that happened here any less intriguing, any less interesting to read about. A lot of the times we miss out on interviews like this because of the language barrier, and this is an opportunity to get to see into a piece of history, not just for Final Fantasy XI, but for the franchise as a whole. And I think that's really valuable. So I'm glad that I took this time, over an hour, to read this, and we'll see how many of you decide to stick with it and listen to what I have to say about the various bits and pieces that are present here in this interview with Ishii-san. So thank you for watching. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, you have a good one. Bye-bye.